Greetings, virtual audience. Good morning to all. We understand we might have a little bit of lip flap or lack of sync in our talking and our visual, but that happens in this world. So happy to be co-hosting the REDI annual luncheon. I'm one of your MCs this morning, Alan Schaffler from Central Oregon Daily News, and we are a proud sponsor of today's event.
That's right, and I am Samantha O'Connor, also from Central Oregon Daily News. Very excited to be here, partnering with Alan, of course, to host today's first ever virtual event for REDI.
And of course, a big thanks to today's event sponsors. REDI was able to offer the luncheon at a discount, and we're really happy that so many of you are joining us in support of growing the Redmond business community.
Absolutely, so please help us welcome to the screen REDI's board president, Bruce Barrett with Windermere Real Estate.
Welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Bruce Barrett, REDI board president and commercial real estate broker with Windermere Central Oregon Real Estate. 6 months ago, when we began planning our annual luncheon, we did not anticipate the events that would unfold. As a result, we're forced to make a nimble pivot, not unlike what most of you are doing in your businesses. We believe this year's program will be particularly relevant as our keynote speaker focuses on finding purpose within ourselves to better serve clients in this now chaotic business environment that we find ourselves in. We'll also hear about successes REDI has had in building economic resilience and what we all can do to maintain a strong business environment moving forward into recovery. Thanks to our many supporters as we bring this REDI luncheon to you by way of virtual web. Before we introduce our speakers, I'd like to take the time to recognize our title sponsors, Ben Broadband, Central Oregon Community College, and First Interstate Bank. We would also like to thank Hand in Hand Productions and Central Oregon Daily News for helping us run the show. On behalf of REDI, thanks again for joining us and enjoy the program.
All right, thank you so much, Bruce. And now let's hear from more of our title sponsor.
Hello, I'm Travis Browning, Market President of First Interstate Bank. First Interstate Bank and its employees in Redmond are honored to sponsor this luncheon and to continue our long-term support of Redmond economic development and its commitment to guiding us toward a more vibrant community. Much like REDI and the community-minded business professionals it supports, First Interstate Bank is committed to giving back. In fact, over the span of our unique 50-year history, First Interstate Bank and its foundation have donated more than $50 million to the places we call home. And if you don't know much about us, I want to share that philanthropy is really the driving force behind what makes First Interstate and its employees so unique. In addition to supporting local organizations and efforts via financial contributions, First Interstate staff is also committed to donating time. Last year, First Interstate employees donated more than 20,000 volunteer hours, a point of pride for our bankers who believe we are only as strong as the communities we serve. This tradition of giving is as deeply rooted in our corporate value system as it was 50 years ago when we opened our first branch. And during this challenging time faced with a global pandemic, our bankers are just as ready and eager to serve. Whether assisting with PPP loans, helping clients find financial solutions, or offering support in the form of sponsorships, donations, our team understands that now more than ever, community members need a community bank. I am honored to be among you today and proud to be a long-term member of REDI. I would personally like to thank John Stark and the REDI board for the great work they do to make our community strong and vibrant. Thank you for allowing First Interstate Bank to be a part of this virtual luncheon.
Travis, thanks. Good to hear from you. Now let's hear from Nicole Lewis with Ben Broadband.
Hello, my name is Nicole Lewis. I am the Associate Manager of Field Marketing for Ben Broadband. Ben Broadband is proud to return as Redmond Economic Development, Inc.'s annual luncheon sponsor for the third year. We are also happy to support the Central Oregon community in these trying times by providing free 60-day internet to over 200 customers, making a $10,000 donation to a local food pantry. We're ensuring our backup systems are in place to help mitigate against unexpected interruptions as more and more people are learning and working from home. We have temporarily stopped disconnections. We're waiving late fees and not charging for data cap overages. All of our customer-facing employees have been given additional hygiene training as well as sanitation toolkits. All of our appointments and service calls are limited contact, and we are utilizing proper social distancing. All of our Non-customer facing employees are equipped to work from home to adapt to CDC recommendations. For more information about this and Ben Broadband's products and services, you can go to benbroadband.com. We are so glad to be a part of this event to support Redmond Economic Development, Inc. and the Central Oregon community. Thank you.
And our thanks to Nicole. And now introducing Dr. Lori Chesley, President at Central Oregon Community College.
Welcome everyone to REDI's annual luncheon. COCC has been proud to serve our region for over 70 years, and we're especially grateful to the City of Redmond and to Deschutes County for helping us establish a campus here in 1993. We believe that community colleges have to be strong partners in regional economic development, so we're pleased to be a longtime member of REDI, as well as to be a title sponsor for today's lunch. To say that we live in uncertain times is an understatement. People sometimes ask me, when does COCC plan to be open? We're open now. We're here for students and for the community now, ready to serve with remote or in-person instruction as health and safety allow. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to serve, and thank you for being such great community partners.
And thank you once again to our three title sponsors for making today's event a reality.
That's right. Now, up next, we have a REDI Senior Director, John Stark, with a bit more about what's happening in Redmond.
Hi, I'm John Stark, Senior Director of Redmond Economic Development. We're so delighted you could make it to our virtual annual luncheon today. Just want to take an opportunity to thank a couple of our sponsors, our annual luncheon presenting sponsors, Fly Redmond, the Redmond Airport, Hooker Creek Companies, and Pacific Power. My remarks today will be talking a little bit about where we've been, where we are now, and what's ahead for us in the future. As you know from many of my reports, we have had some record growth in our manufacturing employment growth over the last 9 years following the Great Recession. Our manufacturing growth at 88.4% over that 9-year period far exceeds the national growth of 11.4% by 8 times, almost exactly, and we're 4 times that of Oregon's growth in manufacturing. So Redmond certainly is the hub for manufacturing, and wages in that industry have exceeded 97%. So there's almost 100% or double the amount of money in terms of wages in our Redmond community on an annual basis. When the primary sector grows, that manufacturing sector, so does secondary employment. And so our covered employment growth over that period of time was 42%. And with that, we have more businesses in town than we've had since pre-recession numbers. We've grown that sector, covered employment establishment growth, by 39%. And then while things kind of settled down a bit out in the county as a whole, and in Bend, employment growth up through 2019 slowed to about 3% after being at about 6% for the larger communities, Bend and Redmond. However, Redmond pre-COVID was running at about 5% still. So we've definitely been batting above our averages here. REDI has been fortunate to be a part of some really great projects over the last 10 years, 60 to be exact, and those 60 projects have created more than 2,000 jobs in the traded sector and 108 million in capital investment. We were very much a part of the recovery from the last recession, and we're geared up to be very much a part of this recovery related to COVID. And then there was a pandemic. So all these great numbers had happened to us. We were on a tremendous run. And then 17% of our covered employment was wiped away by COVID. And while a lot of these companies are starting back up again, and we still have yet to see how our employment rates will play out, we're expecting to see 20+% in unemployment for the month of April. And so you add that 17% of unemployment insurance claims processed during a 7-week period leading up to early May to the 4% unemployment we had, and then you start counting those not covered by unemployment that are now being covered with regard to 1099 employees and sole proprietors and contractors. And it's easy to see why we might be in that 20 percentile of unemployment. So how do we climb out of this? Well, there's some opportunities that exist with any downturn. We're starting to see that play out in the industrial real estate market. Compass Points continues to report that absorption outweighs any new space that's been added. And so our vacancy rate continues to trend downwards, but it's likely to improve because there's been some vacancies with business closures, businesses downsizing. Add to that some new buildings, which you'll see at the top of my screen here, that have been added to the market and will be added to the market over the months ahead. And it's likely that supply may start to outpace demand a little bit. So what happens then? Well, the market responds and rates can go down. And through this 7 weeks, we've seen the first part of that occur. The advertisement to the right there is 60 to 65 cent listing for some industrial space where rates have been closer to 70 to 85 cents a square foot plus triple net. And then you see on the left there's some folks offering some deals with free rent scaling up to market rate over a 6-month period. So we anticipate there'll be some more of those. And then landlords oftentimes are willing to take less than they're putting on the market today. So again, I think that will play out over time. There's still some uncertainty, but I do think there's some more affordability headed our way, industrial space, and there are businesses that need it. Also, some opportunities around talent acquisition. So you see a change in employment by 14,000 people that lost their jobs, and that number has gone up a little bit. 1,500 jobs have been unfilled in the traded sector. So it's an opportunity for those companies to find some new talent today. Consumer Cellular is still looking for about 350 seats to fill, and others are continuing to hire as well. And so it's not all doom and gloom in the traded sector. Most of our companies are operating at 70 to 120% of the capacity they normally are for this year. And that's right, some are busier than they were during normal times in April and May. And then also those folks that have been laid off will take an opportunity during a recession to go and pursue some education. And so we'll skill up our labor force, and that'll mean better opportunities for us to acquire talent ahead. So what else is happening? The last 3 to 4 weeks, we've been doing economic development, the things that we're best at. We've had property transactions that we're working with local brokers on for 3 expanding companies. We've been in a competitive bid process for another 20 jobs with another state for an existing business. We're assisting local companies with their tax abatement savings so they can hang on to some cash flow to hire more employees. We've been expediting land use permits on 2 expansion projects for Basics and XBeyond 360. We're collaborating with the city in the development of a new urban renewal district to allow us to have some dry powder to help us through this recovery. And then we're also working with 3 businesses from outside the area, 2 of which are very probable to happen here in Redmond in the next several months. So we hope to have some announcements ahead. And then we're developing infrastructure to help set the table to help us through this recovery. In short, our projects list is growing. Only a handful, 1 or 2, have slowed a bit in terms of their interest as we work through this recovery, but we have a number of companies that are contacting us today that are asking us for our assistance in helping them either expand or relocate into our community. So what does that look like? Breaking apart our pending projects list of about 30 companies, 13 of those companies are new business recruitment, and 17 of those companies, or about 56%, are expansion projects. Now, what does that look like by size? So again, our sweet spot is finding smaller companies and helping them grow. Good example of that is Medline Renewal, formerly Medisys. They were 14 employees when they moved to Redmond. Today, they're over 240. And so a number of projects with less than 5, 10 of those. And then again, our sweet spot, that 6 to 20 range. Those companies that are talking about expanding, relocating, have said that they're going to create 6 to 20 jobs. About 13 of our projects are in that field. And then you have some larger projects too, that 21 to 100 with 4 and greater than 100 with 2. Then what industries are represented in our pending projects list? You can see a lot of consumer goods, and those are still alive because they've not been hit by the COVID downturn. And so we've got over 10 businesses in that space. Building products is another large portion of our list, and then advanced manufacturing, aviation, aerospace, medical device, all industries we've seen grow in our community, and that's part of the competency of our community and our workforce to serve those businesses. But suffice to say that these are the industries that are going to help us dig out of the very crater that was created by COVID, and will create wealth in our community that then will be distributed by those restaurants and hospitality and service sector industries that are coming back online today, and we'll obviously be happy to see some of the demand by jobs growing in these sectors. So just some good news in light of some long-term bad news that we've heard. We know the unemployment rate's going to be high, but these are the industries I think that are going to help us grow out of this recession caused by COVID. So those are my remarks for today. I just want to thank all of you, our investors and our attendees, for being a part of our broadcast today. Thanks so much for being a part of this. We thought the message was strong, so instead of canceling, we pushed ahead. Thanks so much for your support of REDI.
And thank you, John. Fascinating challenges and opportunities and some great news shared on the horizon.
Absolutely. Now, before we gear up for the keynote speaker today, did you know, like EDCO, REDI is a membership organization of its own. REDI has more than 100 investors. Memberships make up about 40% of their annual budget. That's huge. And if you're not yet a REDI investor, consider it today to support the important work they're doing behind the scenes in Redmond.
Now, before introducing Zach Mercurio, we would like to quickly thank our supporting sponsors, Mackenzie Cascade and Miller Lumber.
That's right. And don't forget about our VIP lounge sponsors watching together virtually. That's BLRB Architects, Columbia Bank, and Mid-Oregon Credit Union.
And thanks to all of you for rallying your troops for the message ahead.
That's right. Okay, so if anyone has questions for Zach, please ask away in the chat sidebar. You do not need to be, or excuse me, you do need to be logged in.
Remember, if you don't have an account, don't worry, just click log in as guest, then enter your name, get your question together, and hit submit.
Yeah, Alan and I have figured it out. We're watching the comments and we're ready to get your questions over to Zach. So let's talk about Zach. Zach earned his PhD in organizational learning, performance, and change from Colorado State University, where he researches purpose, meaningful work, purposeful leadership, and organization development.
He has worked with and advised leaders in global companies, nonprofits, K-12 schools, and universities all around the world, such as the National Park Service, Crocs, the Ghirardelli Chocolate Company, and the Alzheimer's Association.
His work is featured internationally in media outlets such as Forbes, the Huffington Post, and Thrive Global.
Zach Mercurio is an organization and leadership development researcher, adjunct professor, strategist, keynote speaker, and the best-selling author of Invisible Leader, Transform Your Life, Work, and Organization with the Power of Authentic Purpose, and we understand a fine utility infielder.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome to the screen, Zach, with all of these accolades. We are very honored to have you as our keynote today, and thank you for being willing to meet us online to make it happen live.
Yeah, thanks, Sam and Alan. I appreciate it. I was a second baseman in Little League.
You see, I knew.
That's good enough.
Yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for having me. And I wish that I could be there in person. After talking with John and the REDI team, I really felt a sense of connection with you all and REDI and Central Oregon. And I am going to be back and meet you all in person. But right now, what I want to share with you is very personal for me. If you rewind to Friday, March 13th, Friday the 13th, if you think about it, it's a pretty cruel date. When Colorado was deciding to lock down, I lost about 40% of my business in just a few hours while sitting in the parking lot of my kids' daycare. And I stared at my phone and I watched the messages coming in of canceled engagement after canceled engagement after canceled engagement. My research and my work is to work with organizations in person, most of the time in large events. I take my research and help leaders and organizations build thriving places for people to work and resilient places. And so being in large crowds wasn't a very pandemic resistant occupation. And I remember as I was getting all of that business canceled, I started panicking. I could feel it. My hands started tingling. I felt like I was having a panic attack, and I started reacting on instinct. What am I going to do? How am I going to get this business back? And when we react on instinct, fear, frustration, anger, our bodies actually narrow our attention on survival. We actually get more self-centered when we're trying to survive. And that's where I became absorbed in my phone. I was texting my wife. I was trying to get the business back. I was trying to do all of these things. And 30 minutes went by like I was in a time warp, and I still hadn't gone in to pick up my kids, my 5-year-old and my 2-year-old. This is Jackson and Tapley, obviously pretending to be bears in a bear cave. And they were waiting for me. And I put my phone down. I got out of my car. I went into daycare. And the first room I went into was my 2-year-old's room. And he came running up to me and gave me what I think was a longer hug than usual. And he wanted to show me his frog that he finger painted. It was actually kind of like a green blob, but he was so excited about it. And then I went into my 5-year-old's room, and he wanted to show me this Lego tower he was proud of. And he said, "Dad, can we go home?" And I said, yeah, let's go home. And I realized something in that moment that
Hey,
they didn't
what's
care.
below the screen? Where do we go next? I don't
They
think we've
didn't
got
care
this
about
on
my
this.
lost revenue. They didn't care
Can you roll the
about
prompter forward?
my
Oh,
keynote
okay. We just go right to
sessions
questions.
being
Cool.
canceled. They needed me to be there. They needed me to be there for them. And I think crisis reveals what we hinge our identity on, because what's taken away from us, we usually understand its true value. And I realized that I had hinged my identity on what I did and what I got for what I did, my doing, my activity, and not who I was and why I was, my being. And it's ironic because the psychological research that I've known, that I've taught, that says that when we set too many results oriented or self-image goals, we feel more anxious, depressed, and disconnected, became very real for me in that moment. And as individuals and organizations, it's a fragile existence to hinge our identity on the things that we acquire and achieve, results, profits, goals, because you either achieve them or not. And if you do, you have to make another goal. If you don't, and if you can't do the things that you thought brought you worth, which is what happened to me, then what? And I had experienced that emptiness. And New York Times bestselling author and columnist David Brooks calls these things resume virtues, the goals we set to raise our success or outward status. And the opposite of a resume virtue is a eulogy virtue, what you want people to say about you when you're gone, and your business when you're gone. And so even though I researched purpose and meaning, I was pursuing resume virtues. It had clung up in the routines of everyday life. It had come up, and I let it seep in, and I let my identity being become hinged on those things. And really, after this, people aren't going to remember the things that we do. They're not going to remember our spreadsheets. They're not going to remember our projections or our flowcharts, the what. They're going to remember our empathy, our compassion, our vision, our purpose, how we led our companies and ourselves through this. Jackson and Tapley, they needed me at that moment. Someone needs you. Someone needs your organization. At the very end of every supplier service chain in Central Oregon is a human being with a life as vivid and complex and as important as your own. Purposeful leaders focus on those people, their purpose, their will to survive. So as you're thinking about the last few months and thinking about the months ahead, which are difficult, I want you to think about, instead of this question of how will I get through this, start to think about this question of who needs me to get through this? Who needs us? Who needs this economy? Who needs your organization? Who needs your company? And the answer to that question is your purpose. And in the last few months, I've realized the value of the research that I had been doing for 10 years, that when we focus on who needs us, our purpose, we and our companies become better, we become more creative, we become more resilient. Because to survive, we need a will to survive. That reason for being, that reason for existence is our will. So today, I want to talk about how we reset and refocus on that will, that reason, that purpose, and inspire our stakeholders to join us in thriving in the post-COVID world. So I've been hearing a lot of people talk about the future of work. And there's one certainty, only one certainty about the future, is that it is a consequence of what we do right now. So how can we right now start creating the future that we want? And I think it starts with being purposeful. So purpose is the reason for which something is done or created or for which it exists. It's the simplest definition. It's right in the dictionary. It's your usefulness. Of what use are you to the world? Who cares if you're around in 5 years as a business? How do you contribute? What do you want your legacy to be? But we all have mission statements and vision statements. And it's really key to understand that we can have purpose. You all do already, and not be purposeful. So being purposeful is contribution centered thinking, feeling, being, and doing. And it's so easy, especially in crisis, to start focusing on the things we have to do without reinstilling why we even do them, which is the energy we need to do them in the first place. And so I want to introduce you to some people that I've met through my research and work that are purposeful and what this actually means. On the screen here, this is Brittany Ray. She is a chef in Denver. Now, right when the pandemic hit, she lost both of her jobs. The normal thing to do would probably be to go back and start getting stressed and panicking and start thinking about how she's going to get jobs and fill in that income. But the first thing that Brittany did is she said, my purpose as a chef is to prepare food for people, to give people something to eat. And what she thought in that moment, she said in an interview, was how can I use this purpose to help other people? She set up a kitchen in a local church and just started doing what she did best. She started making food for people who were isolated at home, low-income families, the elderly who couldn't get out. And she got her friends together and they started delivering meals. And sooner or later, as a result of her being purposeful, the news outlets picked her up and she has become a very household name here in Colorado. That's being purposeful. She had this purpose to provide food for people. She was purposeful because she reacted and she responded in a way that put her contribution first. And we know that when people do that, they become better. Some of my research has been around janitors. Just last year, I spent 2 years embedded with a group of university janitors. These are the people that make everything else possible. The people that clean the dormitories, clean the bathrooms, vacuum the hallways. And who you see on the screen right here is Ellen. She was one of the janitors in my study. And one of the things that we find from janitors who are doing very routine work, the everyday work that often gets overlooked, is sometimes called dirty work. What we realized through interviewing people like her is that they all had something in common. The people that experienced regular meaningfulness and purpose in their work, and they were thriving. And that is they constantly reminded themselves about why they were doing what they were doing. So for example, Ellen would say that she hated going in and cleaning the bathrooms. It was a task she didn't like. But she would constantly remind herself, tell herself the story, I'm cleaning the bathroom so that the kids don't get sick. That may sound like a very simple statement. I'm cleaning the bathrooms so that the kids don't get sick. But that so that is having a purposeful mindset. Think about something you're doing today. Think about what you're doing next after this luncheon. Add so that to the end of it, and you'll quickly realize there's a human being that's depending on you, even in our most mundane and routine moments of our work. You also see here, Ellen has a lap full of hats that she's crocheting. Ellen loves crocheting, and she would spend her breaks in this really difficult, grueling job knitting hats for all of the students that lived in her dormitories so that she could see them around campus and so that she could know and be reminded of her bigger impact. This is being purposeful. And there's my 5-year-old Tapley. She knitted us a hat. She knitted the governor of Colorado a hat. And what we find in thousands of interviews like Ellen is that when people stay connected to the reason for which they exist in how they approach everyday tasks and the everyday work, that they become better. Research finds that purposeful people are more engaged in work. It's the number one factor in job satisfaction. People are more likely to be promoted when they have a sense of purpose. The National Institutes of Health finished up a longitudinal study after controlling for numerous risk factors, found that people who have a purposeful mindset, meaning they think about their contribution and the meaningfulness of their work in their life, actually live 7 years longer on average and have a 23% reduction in early mortality events. We're more likely to experience contentedness and more likely to learn something new every day. And you don't need a researcher like me telling you this. You think about Ellen and you think about George. Ellen is a custodian who is there, she knows, to serve the students. George is there to get through to the weekend or get the paycheck. They both face the same stressful situation. We know that the response is different. And so being purposeful is powerful. And I often say the most extraordinary people that I've met do ordinary things with an extraordinary perspective. Now, what do we know when organizations do this? Well, organizations are individuals who organize. So when individuals are purposeful, organizations become better as well. We know that purpose-driven organizations outperform the market by an average of 6-1. We also know that purpose-driven organizations are more likely to experience year-over-year growth. But it's not just because of magical branding or social impact branding. It's because of what researchers call high purpose clarity, that people from the C-suite all the way to the front line know on a daily basis that they matter and exactly how they matter. And that's the role of purposeful leaders, especially in crisis, is to make sure all stakeholders know and are reminded of that reason for existence and how they matter to make that reason for existence possible. So why does purpose work? Well, it works for 3 reasons. The first is that it refocuses us on contribution. Researchers who hook people up to fMRI machines and measure brain waves and then actually take blood and measure neurotransmitter chemicals in experiments find that when we think about our impact on others or actively help another person, we get a boost of the neurotransmitters called dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. You don't have to remember all of that. What you might want to remember is that these are the neurochemicals that control for mood, how we feel, movement, how we actually do what we're doing, and then motivation, the energy that we have. If you think about your organization and you think about culture, what are we trying to do in work? Mood, we want people to feel good. Motivation, we want people to have the energy. And movement, we want people to do good work so that we can continue delivering our purpose by having a profit to do so. Contribution has been shown to be one of the key and most significant predictors of mood, movement, and motivation. People knowing that they matter and how they matter. The second reason purpose works is it inspires self-transcendence. Ellen Langer, who's the Harvard scientist, did a study in the late 1970s, and she took a group of nursing home patients. And for one group, she controlled for genetic predisposition, risk factors, all sorts of other controls. And she took another group of nursing home participants. And for the first group, the experimental group, all she did was she gave them a plant and told them for the next 18 months, your job is to keep this plant alive. For the control group, she didn't do anything. And she measured them over 18 months after controlling again for all of these other factors. And what she found is astounding and has since been observed and replicated since. Twice as many of the nursing home residents who were tasked with keeping the plant alive were alive after 18 months than the control group who didn't have the plan. When the object of our behavior is outside of ourselves as an organization or an individual, we become better and can often live longer. So as an organization, if you want your organization to live longer, what we're talking about today, to be gritty, to be resilient, attaching it to the bigger purpose is powerful. And so self-transcendence inspires resilience. Angela Duckworth, in her book Grit, she did a wide-ranging study on what cultivates resilience. Grit is resilience over time. Having an other-centered purpose was a key correlate with resilience or high grit scores. But what I want you to notice on this graph here is the pleasure line. Pleasure means everything going well. Oftentimes, I think we want everything to go well, right? If we're leaders of our companies, we want the pain to go away from this time. But we don't become resilient when things go well. In fact, there's no correlation between happiness and resilience. There's no correlation with stability and resilience. We do not thrive despite our challenges. And all of the research on positive organizations and positive individuals, we know that we thrive precisely because of our challenges, because of what we learn over time and through the challenge, and because challenges often reveal not only who we are, as the challenge revealed who I really was when I was sitting in that parking lot, it reveals who we really need. And most importantly, a crisis reveals who needs us and helps us to really ask these important questions. The final reason why purpose works is that it lasts longer than results. The problem with being motivated by results, primarily as an organization, is the fact that you can achieve them or you don't. And then what? Oftentimes, we feel the same level of emptiness. Psychologists call that the arrival fallacy. When we focus on that bigger purpose, it constantly pulls us forward. And every result and every effect in our organization has a cause. I see many organizations that try to pursue a result, earnings, profit, sales goals for the result's sake. You can't get an effect by pursuing an effect. Every effect has a cause. That cause is your contribution. That contribution is your purpose. Purposeful companies and purposeful organizations relentlessly pursue contribution and trust that the effects will follow. Now, I'm not saying the results aren't important. If you look at the arrow going to contribution, profit enables us to be able to deliver purpose. So it's not profit or purpose, purpose or profit. I don't subscribe to that. It's profit because of purpose so that we can deliver more purpose. And so what I want to do is share with you why it's so important right now. Because oftentimes in crisis, what happens on a larger scale is exactly what happened to me in that parking lot. Normally, we have a good sense of why we are and what we're doing, and those things are together in stable times. But as soon as an external pressure comes, we start focusing on the external pressure. What do I need to do? How can I overcome it? What do I need to do next? And the more we focus on the what, the less attention we have to focus on the why. It's called the split. But ironically, the why is the very energy and the source of the energy we and our people need to respond to the external pressures. So we get into this cycle where we deplete the energy, the motivation, the inspiration that we need to respond to the thing that caused us to focus on the what. Purposeful leaders make sure that reinstilling the purpose and the why is aligned with and embedded in the approach. So what do we do? So purpose is important. Purpose helps us focus on ways of being, not just ways of doing. Purpose reminds us of our contribution, and we scientifically become better. Purpose predicts resilience. And finally, purpose lasts longer than results. So if we want to create gritty, long-lasting organizations, reinstilling purpose is important. But purpose is a practice. One person said to me, Zach, this is the fluffy stuff. I get that all the time. And I said, it's only fluffy if you don't do anything with it. How do we take purpose and put it into actual tangible actions? I'm going to share with you 3 core practices that you can take away right now and start using in your organizations. Showing people how they matter, not just that they matter, but exactly how they matter. communicating and connecting people, your stakeholder world, to your bigger purpose. So that means stating it, knowing it, using that language. And then finally, practicing your purpose regularly, holding yourself as a leader and your organizational accountable for that purpose. Again, so that we can liberate the resources we need to be resilient. The first practice under showing people how they matter is to tell and collect stories of impact. Remind your people why you exist. A few years ago, I was giving a talk to a group of distribution center managers who work for a company that supplies small widgets that go to a manufacturer that then manufactures part of an MRI machine that then sends that MRI machine out to the general customer base. These people are 4 steps removed from seeing the end user of their project. So you could imagine that their teams over time became increasingly measured on their results, their efficiency goals of getting the widgets out the door. And I went into this session and I was after the chief operating officer just chewed them out for not meeting their quarterly efficiency goals. Here comes the purpose guy. So you could imagine that crowd. And I go in and they were miserable. I mean, people were looking at their phones. They weren't looking at me. They were totally disengaged. And I stopped the session. And I said, why are you all even here? Why don't you just leave this hotel ballroom and go home? And this one woman started crying in the front. And I thought, oh my gosh, I screwed this up. But she started crying. And I asked, what's wrong? And she said, I've been here for 13 years and nobody ever has asked me why I'm here apart from what I do or what I get for what I do or what I produce. And then she started crying more and she goes, I'm realizing it right now. She said that she was in an MRI machine a month earlier because she was diagnosed with an early stage cancer. She said she looked up at the logo on the MRI machine and remembered seeing that logo on boxes in her distribution center. And she said this verbatim in this room of people who was still not engaged. She said, I realized that my job has existed for 13 years to save my own life. You talk about an antidote to employee disengagement. That room changed. All of a sudden, people perked up. You could just see the dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin when they heard that story. And what we did with that group is they started brainstorming who's most disengaged in their organization. And they went down to the line workers, the people on the distribution center line. And all we did was we started going into their weekly safety meetings and sharing the story of a customer using an MRI machine. Engagement slowly started going up. And on our quarterly pulse surveys, turnover slowly started going down. People were excited about their jobs again. They were yearning to matter. Researcher Adam Grant at the Wharton School finds that when people hear one story of how their work matters from a beneficiary's voice, they're up to 400% more motivated and productive. So telling stories of impact regularly, especially right now, are incredibly important. This is Dr. Turner. He's a radiologist in Israel. He wanted to know what would happen if we saw a face of somebody on a CT scan when we needed to diagnose that scan. So he used a group of radiologists that work from home, that receive scans virtually. They do their diagnostics and they send it back to physicians. He took a group of scans and he sent it out to an experimental group. And all he did differently was put a headshot of a patient on that scan. The control group, he sent out the scans as usual. He wanted to know if the quality of their diagnostic reports would change. The group that saw the headshot on their scans, those radiologists ended up writing over 25% longer interpretive reports than the control group who didn't see the headshot. And they ended up finding more incidental findings that would be important to the patient's future prognosis. Seeing the face, putting a face to the name, seeing the human at the end of the chain in our everyday tasks makes us better. I was working with a group of plumbers. Imagine this, plumbing contractors after a long 14-hour shift. And here comes Zach working with them for 3 hours on meaning and purpose. And they did not want to be there. Let's just say that. They were all kind of leaning back. They were kind of mumbling things to each other. And all I did is put a picture of my kid up there eating a donut I mean, if you look at that, there's a lot of joy there, but that's not why I put it up. There's a plaza, a shopping district right near my house that was just developed. And in it, they put my kid's favorite donut shop. Now, I showed this picture to them and I said, what do you see here? And they all kind of started perking up because it's a cute kid. But one of them started really getting up and looking really close at the screen. And he said, that's the Exchange. The Exchange is the name of the plaza, the shopping center. And this other guy said, yeah, we worked on that project. And all of a sudden, the room changed because what they realized was that kid eating a donut was a direct recipient of their commercial plumbing work to make that plaza possible. Purposeful leaders make that link clear. And all I did was that, and the room changed, and we had an amazing session. So tell and collect stories of impact. The next practice is to design jobs for meaningfulness. We can actually design jobs to bring out more purpose in our people. There are 3 things that predict motivation and a sense of purpose in a particular job. So think of the tasks that your people are doing right now. Think of a task that you might be doing right now and ask yourself a few questions. 1, how does it affect a human being? So do your leaders and your team people know how what they're doing affects another person? The second is, what end outcome does it make possible? So what is the bigger outcome that task is essential for? And then the third question is, which of that person's strengths can they use to do more, do it better? So for you, if you're thinking about a task right now, which one of your strengths can you use to approach that strength differently? These 3 elements are what we know by and far predict motivation. So let's put it in the context of this challenge right now. If you need to connect people to a bigger purpose right now, start connecting their tasks to that purpose. Make sure when you're delegating tasks, when you're reviewing tasks, when you're talking about tasks, when you're talking about how someone's work will help you get through, that they know how it affects a human being, what end outcome it makes possible, and how they can use their strengths to do it. I encourage you to make job descriptions that answer these questions. Instead of making a list of things the job does, talk about the human beings, the tasks impact, the outcomes it make possible, and which strengths are needed to do that meaningful work well. The result is we start cultivating at the task level, at the team level, and so at the organizational level, a purposeful mindset and a purposeful approach to the work. The final practice here is giving affirmation, showing people the evidence of their work's meaning. And I often say to people, if I was in a room with you, I'd ask, how do you tell people they did a good job? And oftentimes people would say, well, I say, good job. But the key here is not to just tell people good job, it's to regularly show people the difference they make through a story. Show them how their task mattered. Collect stories about their impact. Encourage your middle leaders to collect stories about their team's impact and regularly feed that back to them. We know that people tend to put in 30 to 40% more effort when they know why their work matters and why they matter instead of just getting affirmation. And that helps to give the evidence repeatedly that the work matters. So show people how they matter. Tell and collect stories of impact. Give purposeful affirmation, and make sure you're designing jobs for meaningfulness. The second practice is to communicate and connect people to your purpose. One of my favorite stories is when John F. Kennedy was launching the Apollo missions. He went into the Space Center to give a speech and accidentally went into a mop closet that he thought was a green room. And he saw a janitor and said to the janitor, "Hey, what do you do here?" And the janitor very calmly looked at him and said, "Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon." And then he went back to his work. Allegedly, this moment changed how JFK thought about purpose. If you remember the axiom, it's not what your country can do, it's what you can do for your country. It allowed him to think about the power of self-transcendence. But when we actually research what NASA did, which is take a workforce of 300,000 people and get them connected to a mission that most of them would never see actually happen, we learn a lot of lessons in one of the best management practices of all time, in my opinion. because what each team had that made that purpose real for them in their everyday work was what's called a ladder to the moon. Researchers find that every week they knew how their tasks that week would connect to a bigger objective, would connect to another measurable objective, would connect to another measurable objective, and then would ultimately put a person on the moon. One of the best ways to connect task to purpose is to make it real, tangible, and measurable. Because we can have an aspirational purpose, but if people don't experience it in their everyday work life, then it doesn't become real. It doesn't become believed. And imagine that janitor, right? Imagine him getting up on a Monday morning being like, darn, it's Monday, or the economy's bad. Here I go. I have to go in and put a man on the moon this week. Or it's Wednesday, hump day. Only 3 more days left of this putting a man on the moon business. You can know a mission statement and hate Mondays. It's almost psychologically impossible to believe in your other-centered purpose and wish it was Friday. So show people what your bigger purpose is. So here's a big practice here. If you don't have a purpose statement, which is why you exist, it's not unusual. I mean, a lot of people focus on mission statements, which is what you do, vision statements, which is what it's going to look like in the future. But your purpose is why you are. So state and communicate your purpose. And I see purpose at the individual level and the organizational level happening at the intersection of your strengths and the impact that you make. How do you as a company, as an individual, use your resources to make an impact? Let's step back and look at the individual picture right now. As an individual, you have passions, you have things that you love, you have things that you're really good at, your talents. What are those passions and talents in service of? How do you want people to leave an interaction with you? What do you want people to think, feel, be, do, or have as a result of you? My grandfather sent me a card a couple of years ago. He's 97 now, and he sends me a card with a $1 bill wrapped in tissue paper every year for my birthday. And he sent me a card, and in the card, all he wrote was, Zach, how do you improve the moment? How do you use your strengths to make a difference as a leader? As an organization, how do you use what you know how to do well, what brings you alive, what energizes your workforce to make a difference? And then state it. And you'll get these slides afterwards, but this is a powerful way to state your purpose. My purpose is to, what are your strengths in action? So my purpose is to help. Who? Who are the people that you serve? So my purpose is to help people and organizations. And then what do you want those people to know, feel, think, be, or have as a result of you? My purpose is to help people and organizations to discover and realize their own significance. Using this purpose statement template, or any template that makes sure you focus on why you exist, what problem you exist to solve, and put your strengths into action to solve those problems, is really powerful in uniting you and your life and orienting your life, but also orienting your organization and serving as that North Star, that pulling force that's going to pull you through this time. I'll give you an example of this in action. One of my clients is a car wash, and they have 5 tunnel car washes in Colorado. And I remember sitting down with Justin, he's on the screen here, and he said, Zach, I don't know, I didn't know what our purpose was. We wash cars. And I asked, what human problem do you exist to solve? And he had to think about it for a little bit. But then we went for coffee again, and he said, Zach, I realized it. No one wants to get up and work at a car wash. Most of our workforce just got their GEDs or are just graduating high school, are lower income. He said that our purpose has to be to prepare them for the future they want. So preparing people for the future was one part of it. But then he said to me, Zach, we asked people why they get their car washed. And people talk about going to funerals, going to graduations, dropping their kids off at college, doing something to make themselves feel good. So he said, we also do provide something for our community. So their purpose is to prepare people for the future and provide for the community. Now, here's how they're doing it. Their key performance indicator is 80% of all employees retained for at least 1 year. That's their KPI, car wash attendance. Right now, they're around 40% retention, but this is their number one KPI, not so they can keep them around to cut turnover costs, but so they can keep them around to help them develop. Each employee gets a personal development plan, Their tasks are delegated to them in how learning to do the task will help them in their future career of choice. Many of them stay at the organization because of this. And they also have 401k options. And right now, during this time, they're building an affordable housing complex for their employees who can't afford it. Now, that 1 million cars washed per year, they wash over a million. The world average for a 5-tunnel car wash system is 315,000. This is the result of the purpose, not the purpose. How did they react during this time? Justin texted me and he said, right when they found out about the lockdown and the impact on the business, the leadership team got together. And he said they spent hours trying to figure out what their people would need to get through this, not how they would financially survive. So they talked about shelter needs, food needs, every what if scenario that could impact an employee's life. And he sent me this picture of the food rations that the team came up with. Now, I love this last comment you see on the screen. The best part, I wasn't there. The team led this without me. Purpose, when it's embedded, can become the invisible leader. When you know why you are, you know what to do. A person doesn't need to be there when your people are instilled with this bigger purpose. So use laddering. Make sure people know your purpose. Make sure they know how their task connects to it. Ernest Shackleton, while he was trying to get his crew to survive when his expedition ship was landlocked in ice during a polar expedition, he went around to each person and said, keep swabbing the deck. Keep taking samples if you're a scientist. Keep preparing food because that will enable us to survive. And he went around every day and said that. So how do people know how their task connects to the bigger purpose? And then finally, find a symbol that shows people and reminds people why you need to survive. This is Southwest Airlines posting a photo on Instagram of an empty plane. That's like the opposite of success if you're an airline. Southwest continued flying more of their normal routes than almost anyone else. Underneath this photo, what it said is what you don't see here is that single passenger up in the front. This is the reason why we continue to lose money on these routes. Think about that statement. This is the reason, the purpose why we continue to lose money on these routes. Because that person was a critical care pulmonologist that was traveling to volunteer in California. Southwest's purpose is to democratize the skies, to provide access to air travel across the socioeconomic spectrum, to provide access and connect people to what they love most through air travel and to who needs them. They were aligning their purpose and risking short-term profit for this bigger long-term human impact. Not ironically, Southwest is the most profitable airline and the only consecutively profitable airline in US history since the late 1970s. When we focus on our why, we become better. The final practice here is to do it every day. So show people how they matter. Remind yourself why you matter through storytelling, story collecting. State your purpose. Communicate and connect your people to purpose regularly through that laddering technique or however you can remember to do that. But then this last piece is making sure you're holding yourself accountable to that purpose. Does what you do, does your attitude, do your behaviors every day align with your purpose? If every stakeholder, after every interaction, could know and feel why you exist without you even saying it, what would you be like? What would you be doing as an organization? So turning it into practice is powerful. But more powerful as leaders is holding ourselves accountable for it. If we want to not go down that spiral of fear, frustration, anger that narrows our attention, that caused me to almost forget picking up my kids, the people who really needed me in that parking lot, then we need to ask better questions of myself. And my poor kid has me as a dad, so I did an experiment on him about 4 months ago when he was going to preschool, and he did not like getting up and going to preschool. He didn't like it. He would complain about it. He didn't want to get dressed, didn't want to do any of that. But the problem wasn't preschool. It's that he was paying attention to the wrong things. He was paying attention to the things that he had to do, not who he was and why he was at preschool. And so every day when he came home, I didn't do anything else, but I asked them these 2 questions. Who did you help today? And who helped you today? First week, I asked him, nothing good happened. I kind of had to chase him around the house because he didn't want to answer me. The second week happening, though, I kept asking him every night, non-punitive. He didn't get in trouble if he didn't answer me. And then he started telling me, oh, Zach, Liza, my friend, helped me pick up today. Or I helped Liza put together this toy. And then just a couple weeks ago, just before the lockdown happened, he came in and without me even having to say anything, he said, Daddy, I couldn't find who helped me today. I'm going to have to look harder tomorrow. What we ask ourselves, what we ask each other, orients our attention, which is our scarcest resources. Are we paying attention to what matters, to what energizes us, to what motivates us? So we'll be able to focus on the things we need to do. He has never complained about going to preschool since because his attention is on the bigger reason for being at preschool. So before I close, and I want to recap, here are some things you can do right now. Find some of the stories that remind you and your stakeholders why you need to survive. Share them, repeat them in your mind. Find a symbol like the Southwest example. It doesn't have to be a branded marketing slogan. It can simply be a story of a customer from years ago that was changed because of you. It can simply be showing people why your product matters out in the world. Second, meet with your team. Tell them what's keeping you up at night. Be honest. The best way to build trust is to tell the truth. Tell them what worries you. Ask them for help. Remind each person how their strengths matter and how their job matters. Have a meeting with people and just share the challenges and ask for help. Transparency is key. And then finally, ask your team, in what 3 ways will moving through this crisis well help us to better deliver this big purpose? What will we feel like? What will we become? What will we be able to do? When you do that, you activate the learning pathway of building resilience. And finally, I want to share with you this quote. Between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This was uttered by Viktor Frankl, who was the author of Man's Search for Meaning, while he was in a concentration camp. He said the ultimate freedom of us as people, as leaders, as organizations, is to create the space to choose our response. So stop and choose a response that delivers your contribution, your reason for being. And remember, your purpose is not what you do as an individual or an organization. It's the impact that you make through what you do. So thanks for inviting me onto your screen right now. If you want to join my newsletter, there's a number there. But I'm going to stop and turn it over to you in case you have any questions or any questions came in. But thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to REDI and EDCO for all of your work on putting this together.
All right, and thank you, Zach. We really appreciate it. Good job. You have fulfilled your purpose today. We do have some questions coming in. The first one is from Gerard O'Brien, who says, my intuition is that businesses will find that they can get along with fewer employees than they had prior to COVID-19. If true, what might happen to the newly unemployed? Now, you're the purpose guy, not an economist. So let's recast that a little bit. How do the newly unemployed, because of this situation, deal with creating their own future and all the uncertainty they're going through?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The first is to not sugarcoat the fact that difficult things aren't going to happen. I mean, you have to be honest about the fact that there are challenges. People will lose jobs. First, I do want to talk about the organization side, though. If your people are going to lose jobs, how are you going to help them find a new job? That's being purposeful. So, for example, I just worked with a company who we actually brought in some people that were being laid off and asked them how we should lay them off. That's radical, right? I mean, that's like a radical thing, but it's human. So engaging with those people that you might have to let go is, I think, really important. But what's going to happen to those people who are unemployed? Again, I'm not an economist, but I don't know. But I think helping them develop an understanding of where their skills, where their strengths meet up with solving real problems in organizations is something that's really valuable and really important for the individual to see their worth and their agency. One of the things that I worry about the most is not necessarily that people won't have jobs. It's the despair and sense of meaninglessness that comes when people aren't able to contribute. So as organizations do have to lay people off, making sure there's a pathway for people to know how they can contribute through their strengths and what they've learned at that organization, I think is a purposeful approach.
Great. Okay, we have one more question from the Redmond Economic Development Inc., or REDI. How do we use purpose to be better at family life and being a good parent?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when you think about your families or your kids, I think it's also goes from this idea of these ways of doing with ways of being, right? And reacting versus responding. For example, there's been many times where my kid has barged in here and almost knocked this microphone off the table. And I had to stop. I mean, he was trying to get my attention. And instead of reacting and being like, I need to be on this call, which is a reaction, creating the space to respond. If my purpose is to help people realize their own significance, I'm not doing that in that moment. So just taking some space and saying to yourself, man, I'm feeling like this angst or frustration. How do I respond in a way that's more in line with my purpose? I think being honest with your kids, being honest with each other is also powerful. For example, I didn't know what the next year was going to look like with my financial outlook and my business outlook. And there were times where I blew up with my family and I lost it. The purpose guy, right? Lost it, as Alan said. And I had to go to my wife and just say, hey, like, I'm nervous about this. I need help. And that's a purposeful approach, just being vulnerable and asking for help. I think the bravest thing a leader can do is ask for help.
Another question too from Aaron Riley. This is an interesting one. Can all of this be executed from the bottom up, or does it have to come from the top down?
Yeah, Aaron, that's a great question. I think that it has to be both, ideally. I mean, you can teach. I mean, I work on the front line with organizations. People have to learn how to discern meaning in their everyday work as a mindset shift, but then also the environment has to cultivate it. For example, one thing I think about is reward structures. I was working with a vice president of sales recently who came up to me and she said, Zach, this is all great, but I need to get my people to collaborate. And I just looked at their reward structure and all they rewarded for was self-serving goals and commissions. And what you reward is ultimately who you become and who you are. So it's no wonder why the people weren't collaborating. So look at your organization, look at your environment from the top down as well, and ask yourself, if I want people to believe in this mission, to believe in their contribution, does the environment remind them of their contribution? Does it reward for contributing? And when those things come together, that's where this works. That's why just having a purpose doesn't really do anything from a financial performance perspective. Being purposeful does, and having high purpose clarity does.
All right, sounds good. Now, Alan and I had some personal questions for you, so I'll ask my
Yeah,
question.
that's great. Go ahead.
How do you stay mindful for others when there's so much uncertainty in your own lives? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes down to the fact that there really aren't any certain moments. I think that in life, our just illusion of certainty that we've created for ourselves has been eroded and exposed, I guess, by this. So I think it's an opportunity to be uncomfortable with the inherent uncertainty that always exists. And one way to do that is to just stop and focus on what you're doing right now, where you are right now, who's around you right now. People often ask, like, what could you do next? Each one of us who's on this call, we're going to do something next, and we're going to talk to somebody today. So asking yourself, how can I use my strengths to help the next person I talk to? How can the thing that I'm doing next, how can I approaching that task? What is that going to do for other people? And just doing that shifts mindset, but it's a practice. Going to the gym sounded great in January, but you have to practice it. This is a practice that we can learn every day.
Real challenge. You talk about creating your own future and being mindful and working through what you're doing now and having that an effect later.
Yeah.
What kind of shift do you have to take? What kind of a nimble pivot do you have to make to deal with that in a time when the broader future is so murky, locally, statewide, globally, so murky? What do you have to sort of tweak as you move forward into that really different and unpredictable environment?
Yeah, and I think purposeful people are systems thinkers in a way. And what I mean by systems is that they can see how a discrete thing they're doing fits into the bigger whole. So imagining the difference of what you're going to do today will inevitably make. I mean, it's infinite. Like all our days are inputs into the system, right? That have an infinite impact. I think we spend a lot of time, and I've been looking, like reading the papers, just like everybody else, looking at the projections, looking at what's going to happen. But what we can do is spend our time right now creating the future that we want to happen. And I think as individuals and in organizations, as leaders, instead of just thinking and guessing about what's going to happen and strategizing about what's going to happen, which is all important, that's a given. I think spending more time creating and thinking about what is the future that we want and bringing people into that creation of that future is more powerful. So I think it's the questions we ask. I mean, as you all know, as journalists, right? The questions we ask determine the quality of the information we get. If we just ask what's going to happen, well, all we're going to get is a bunch of stats. But if we just want, what do we want to create to happen? Ingenuity, creativity, innovation inevitably follow.
All right, and kind of a good follow-up question actually to that. We have one from Michelle O'Hara, who we know well. Are you finding that more people are starting purposeful companies now?
I think it's going to be just like in the late 90s when people were asking, do I need a website for my business? I think in 10 years, and now they're like, yeah, of course. I mean, you have to be online. I think businesses that aren't serving or cultivating a bigger purpose are going to be obsolete, are going to be underperforming. Not just, and this is not to say go out and find a social purpose or a social cause. I'm talking about the car wash. That's literally preparing people for the future because they're hiring people. I mean, if you're in the economy, you are impacting people's lives. I think not putting that front and center of the organization in the next 10 years, I think is not going to cultivate meaningful work, which we know the upcoming generations are looking for and hungry for. And we're not cultivating the resilience over time. We don't have a for what. A guy recently said to me, Zach, I don't have time for this stuff. It's all fluffy. I'm just trying to survive. And I just asked, survive for what? What are you surviving for? For what reason? Bringing that reason back into this is what this is all about on a practical level.
Certainly a question for the ages. Finally, we just want to thank you, Zach, for your insights, and thank all of you out there watching for clicking in today to show your support for the organization and to have a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I'm feeling very motivated now. I'm ready to tackle the rest of the day.
Thanks,
exciting.
Sam. What are you going to do next? Who's that going to affect?
I'm going to eat lunch, and then I'm going to figure out the rest of the day.
There you go. Yeah, do that. Yeah. Eat lunch.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And let's continue to keep our community safe. Let's bring on phase 2 and keep the reopening moving.
And we hope to see you all very soon. Have a great day out there.
Take care.